Obviously, you're John Minto and you had a big part in the tours, the Springbok tour. But I'd like to ask you, what was it that motivated you to become involved in HART and the 1981 Springbok tour protest?
When I was at university in the early 1970s, there was a lot of debate going on about whether the Springboks should come to New Zealand in 1973, and there was a whole fermenting debate about that, and I kind of got involved in the issue there, and I saw it as an issue that New Zealand could, one area where New Zealand could have a really positive effect on what was a crime against humanity being perpetrated in South Africa. And so I got involved from there, and gradually sort of more and more involved till I became the national organiser for HART in 1981.
This being one of the biggest protests that New Zealand has ever had, how do you think the police at the time handled the situation?
Well, I think the police at the time were trying to get the Springboks through the country as quietly as possible, and our job was quite the opposite. We were actually trying to stop the tour from taking place, so we were prepared to use civil disobedience and to break the law to do that. Not taking action against people. We said we weren't interested in violence against people, but we were prepared to, put ourselves physically in the way of the tour to try and stop it. So we were inevitably in a conflict with the police, and I think the police overall handled it quite poorly, because they very much sided with the rugby union, and they should have taken, I think, a more conciliatory approach to the protest.
Good. In 1981, New Zealand rugby was a big part of the culture, and so there was a lot of pro-tour people. Were much of your friends and family anti-tour or pro-tour?
Most of my friends and family were against the tour. They were very supportive of me, and I only had one of my cousins was on the other side, but apart from that, I think most of the family were very strongly supportive.
While New Zealanders protested for people's rights and the problems with the apartheid overseas, do you think it helped us look at the issues with our own racial problems at the time?
Absolutely. I think that was the most important effect on New Zealand, was bringing racism in New Zealand right to the fore, where it had to be debated openly, and I think that was hugely important. And the Māori activists, people like Hone Harawira, who was very actively involved, and the Waitangi Action Committee, they were very vocal here in Auckland and around the rest of the country too, in challenging people who were opposed to the tour to say, look, how can you be concerned about racism overseas without looking at racism in New Zealand? And of course, that was quite right, and I think it was a big challenge to people involved in the protests, and it had an enormous impact in the years that followed. And I think one of the really big impacts was when the government changed the Waitangi Tribunal's powers to allow it to look at historical grievances, because at that time, up until that time, the Waitangi Tribunal could only look at future possible breaches of the treaty, but this, I think the whole debate opened up and allowed for the retrospective looking at grievances again, and that was a powerful thing.
Some police say that they were simply trying to protect the anti-protesters from some of the pro-rugby people. Do you think this statement is true?
Sometimes that did happen here. There were some very violent people from the other side who were determined to have a go at protesters. They were talking about punch a protester, kind of, and often people were violently assaulted. But then, and so the police in some occasions did take that role, but at other times, like in Hamilton, after we broken onto the field and we occupied the middle of the field and we stopped the game from taking place. After that game was cancelled, there was mayhem on the streets of Hamilton. There were dozens and dozens of 111 calls that we to the police that night to ask them for help, because people were being beaten up by tour supporters. Anyone who if you had a bumper sticker that said "Stop the Tour," there were people with those stickers on their cars, and they were just dragged out of their cars and bashed because they had a sticker on it. It was absolute mayhem. And when people called the police in Hamilton that night, the police refused to answer. And the police said to me, they just weren't interested because, especially the police coming from outside town, weren't interested because they felt that the protesters had defeated them that day.
Speaking of all the violence, did any of this ever sway you at any time? Did you ever think of stop protesting?
No, we never did. Our policy was what we called non-violent direct action. So we weren't going to take violence against people, but we were going to put ourselves in the path of the tour to try and stop it, and we knew inevitably there would be conflict about that. And we stuck to that policy pretty well all the way through, although there was a boil-over during the third test here in Auckland. But we stuck pretty much to that policy. We didn't arm ourselves on the protests, and I think we handled ourselves pretty well. But I do think I'm not really answering the question anyway. I think no, I never thought that we were on the wrong track. I always thought we were doing the right thing, and that even though we didn't stop the tour, because we had such a big protest, it meant that wherever the Springboks went in the future, they would either face protests or they would realise they would have to give up. And they did. They gave up, and effectively that was the last time the Springboks played overseas.
As you mentioned, you didn't stop the tour, but you did stop the game, and you got international attention.
Yeah.
Are you happy with the outcome?
Oh, very much so. I think that the tour, if you talk to the people in South Africa, black South Africans, white South Africans, so many of them, and I was in South Africa last year, and without any comment at all, without me saying anything at all, so many of them said, look, the Springbok tour in 1981 was the first time they had realised that their country was such that their policies were regarded as so appalling by people outside. And so it did help to raise the consciousness of white South Africans. And I think it helped a little bit in bringing a quicker end to the apartheid regime.
Lots of the people would say that they were just simply trying to bridge build and show them that over here there was racial, it was a peaceful country and you could live together.
Yep.
Do you think that that's a strong enough argument to still let the tour continue?
No, I think if the world took that position towards South Africa and just showing South Africa that it was a good example in New Zealand and other countries, then I think we'd still today have apartheid in South Africa and Nelson Mandela would still be in jail. I think often people react when they are confronted with something, and I think the protests against Springbok tour here were a confrontation to white South Africa and their policies, and had a very positive effect.
Thank you for your time.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Max.